Mark Cuban explains why private equity takeover is bad for fans. Few NBA owners have been as outspoken and candid as Mark Cuban. The billionaire entrepreneur and longtime owner of the Dallas Mavericks has never shied away from addressing league-wide issues, and his latest comments have once again stirred debate across the sports world. Cuban recently weighed in on the growing influence of private equity firms in professional basketball, arguing that while such investment might be good for franchise valuations, it ultimately spells bad news for fans. Cuban's central point revolves around the shift in priorities that occurs when private equity firms gain ownership stakes in teams. Unlike individual owners, who may balance financial goals with a personal passion for the sport and community, private equity groups are primarily focused on maximizing returns for their investors. According to Cuban, this approach changes the DNA of team management. Fans want to believe that their team is being run with winning as the top priority, Cuban said. But when private equity gets involved, the focus shifts. It becomes more about profits and less about people. For fans, that shift could be costly in more ways than one. Ticket prices, concessions, and merchandise have already been climbing steadily, but Cuban warned that private equity firms could push those numbers even higher. With return on investment as their guiding principle, ownership groups may view fans less as members of a community and more as revenue sources. Cuban pointed to examples from other industries, noting how private equity takeovers often result in higher prices and reduced consumer experience. In his view, the NBA is at risk of falling into the same trap. Beyond pricing, Cuban also raised concerns about how private equity ownership might affect long-term team building. Traditional owners, especially those with strong ties to their cities, often balance profitability with legacy, striving to deliver championships and positive memories even if it means short-term financial losses. Cuban himself has invested heavily in the Mavericks' operations, from facilities to player development, with the goal of creating a winning culture. Private equity, he argued, may be far less patient. Decisions could be driven more by short-term financial results than by the sustained effort required to build championship teams. The issue is particularly relevant today because the NBA has already begun opening its doors to private equity investors. The league now allows firms to purchase minority stakes in franchises, a change made to inject fresh capital and accommodate owners seeking to sell shares without giving up full control. While this move has boosted franchise valuations, Cuban questioned whether it aligns with the best interests of the fans who ultimately fuel the league. He expressed concern that if these firms gain more influence, the values that make basketball special, community connection, loyalty, and competitiveness, could erode. Cuban's comments also touched on the broader cultural impact of such changes. The NBA has long prided itself on being more than just a business. Teams often serve as anchors in their cities, shaping civic identity and inspiring generations of fans. When ownership becomes increasingly corporate, Cuban argued, that human element risks being lost. He compared the NBA's trajectory to that of other industries where consolidation and corporate control stripped away authenticity and consumer trust. For him, basketball should resist following that same path. Critics of Cuban's stance argue that private equity involvement could still bring benefits, including improved efficiency, expanded global reach, and increased financial stability for franchises. Some analysts point out that private equity firms could provide resources and expertise that smaller ownership groups lack. However, Cuban countered that financial growth should not come at the expense of the fans' experience. The heart of the NBA, he insisted, lies in the bond between teams and their communities, a bond that becomes fragile when ownership prioritizes profits above all else. Ultimately, Cuban's warning is less about immediate change and more about the long-term direction of the league. The NBA is growing at a historic pace, with skyrocketing media rights deals and expanding international markets. But Cuban believes the league must be cautious about how it handles that growth. In his view, if private equity investment becomes too dominant, fans may eventually feel priced out and disconnected, undermining the very foundation of the NBA's success. As always, Cuban's words struck a chord because they come from an owner who has lived both sides of the debate. He is a businessman who understands profits but also a passionate competitor who knows the value of fans' trust. For him, the lesson is clear. The NBA must guard against becoming just another corporate product. Basketball, he argues, belongs first to the fans, and that truth should never be compromised.